Hey everyone. So I hope you're all doing well this week. Keep in mind that next week our third writing assignment will be due, the rhetorical analysis essay. And I wanted to use the readings for this week to kind of give you an idea of how to approach the rhetorical analysis essay as well. So we're going to be looking specifically in some of the readings that were assigned for you to read for the things that you're also being asked to look for in this assignment. The genre that we're going to be covering this week, because again, remember, we've been going through the different individual genres of literature. This week's we're kind of touching on two of them, and they kind of blend together: that of history, historical literature, and also that of social science, which we could say is its own brand, but it kind of tends to merge with history if we consider contemporary writings or writings about things that happen in our day and age as a form of history, and I kind of do. 50 years from now, people will look at writings from today and they'll think that that'll be studying history. So let's talk a little bit about the distinction between the two of them. History is a genre of literature that doesn't it does a lot more than just give us names and dates. I think people get the idea of history as this thing that we studied in junior high and in high school, where there's a great big textbook with nothing but names, dates, facts, and figures. And it's really unfortunate because historical literature is more diverse and more entertaining and uh, makes you think a little bit more than that. A good history writing should tell us something about human nature, right? So human nature, if the idea there is that it's constant to an extent, that people 100 years ago, they had different challenges they were facing, but they still were like us in the sense that they had the same needs, the same desires. They wanted safety, family, friendship, love. They all probably dealt with obstacles, betrayals, and so on. So, keeping that idea in mind that human nature, to an extent, is kind of fixed, we can look back and read history and learn from it and apply the lessons of it to our own experiences. Because if people 100 years ago or 200 years ago behaved in a certain way in a certain situation, we can see if that same situation is arising, that people are likely to behave in the same predictable way. But it's a little bit more. There's more to it than even that too, because there has to be an art to writing history. So it's not just the names and the dates, the facts and the figures. A good historian will want to absorb his or her audience into the thing that they're writing about. They'll want to tell a story. Story is actually in the word history, so that's kind of the giveaway. Nobody's going to pay attention if it's just names and dates. But if there's a story to tell, then you have an audience, which is why historical dramas have tended to do pretty well with audiences. I'm thinking specifically about Shakespeare's historical plays of the kings of England. Those were hugely popular. And even today, movies such as, I don't know, Titanic, which was a really popular movie about an event that really happened, or Braveheart. People want to know about the past, and they're more likely to pay attention to history when it's presented to them in a rather entertaining way. And in one of our readings for this week, The Search for Marvin Gardens, the author of this essay is not only trying to give a description of what life was like in Atlantic City through the game of Monopoly, he's also making it vivid by telling a story. And this would be a good example of a technique that an author is using to bolster what their main point is of their essay. So, The Search for Marvin Gardens, John McPhee is trying to tell us about Atlantic City. He gives us some of its history, who was famous there, what the living conditions were like then as opposed to now. All these different just kind of hard facts. But those facts are dispersed by this conversation about the game of Monopoly, which takes place in Atlantic City. And we get him talking about different games that have been played throughout history, who was good at playing Monopoly. So really there's two different historical narratives going on in this essay. There's the narrative about the city and the narrative about the game. But in both of them, it's his descriptions that are very vivid and really make this feel not so much like he's talking about history, but like he's talking about a story. For example, let me find a good one here. Yeah, he's describing Mediterranean and Baltic Avenue. He says, they're the principal avenues of the ghetto. Dogs are everywhere. A pack of 7 passes me. Block after block, there are 3-story brick row houses. Whole segments of them are abandoned, 1,000 broken windows. Some parts are intact, occupied. A mattress lies in the street, soaking in a pool of water. Wet stuffing is coming out of the mattress. So he's given this description of these sort of poor living conditions, and he's getting really vivid with the details. For some reason, that one particularly stands out in my mind, that of the wet mattress laying in the street with stuffing coming out of it. And those are details that aren't really meant to enlighten us more in terms of the cold hard facts, as it were, of the case of the history of Atlantic City, but they are details that kind of fire up the imagination, that kind of put us there mentally, so we can not only know what Atlantic City was like from hearsay, we can see it, we can smell it, we can kind of feel what the atmosphere is like. And this author, John McPhee, does a good job of that. And you'll find that in a lot of well-written history books. One that comes to mind off the top of my head is the one, a history book by a man named Herodotus. He wrote the history of the Persian Wars, which is what the movie 300 is based off of. If you've seen the 300 movie, This is Sparta by Zack Snyder. But in that history book, he really talks up the Persians, gives you an example of what their culture is like, who their allies are, and then he does the same thing for the Greeks. And so when they're eventually joined in battle, it does feel like we know these people to an extent. He just doesn't just say, this army fought this army on this day, and however many died, and so was the victor. No, it's more personal than that. And his writing brings you into that story, just in the same way that John McPhee's The Search for Marvin Gardens does. So give history literature a chance. I think high school textbooks in particular kind of poison people against history, and it's really fun. It can serve as a fun read. It's an easy read because, in a sense, you can read it like fiction, biographies or even autobiographies. It's telling the story about someone. It just, in this case, happens to be true. The other genre that I want to talk about kind of blends into the history genre, but like I said, it's more modern day, and that's that of social sciences. And so if you're reading a work of social science, you're going to notice that it's concerned with society and the relationship of individuals within a society. So the focus is still on the human element there, like it is with history. We're looking at how people behave and trying to learn lessons from that. But in this case, it's usually more modern day. Social sciences will often address pressing concerns such as race, poverty, education, war, or technology. All these issues that we're concerned with, they'll point out. And you'll also notice that it tends to take a stand on these issues. So a work of social science, you'll usually be able to find has a pretty clear definitive thesis at some point along in it. A good example of this from our anthology is Nicholas Carr's essay, which is Google Making Us Stupid? And I think it's a really interesting essay. In the past, this is an essay that's tended to evoke mixed reactions. Some people agree with Carr and some people really disagree with Carr. And his whole argument is that since the advent of new technologies, specifically Google, people's brains have not had to really work on concentrating as hard to gather information as they used to have to at one time. And so, because everything's available at the click of a button, and we live in a sort of hyperlinked mindset where if you're on one website and you're curious about something, there's usually a link there that'll take you right to the next one, as opposed to, back in the day, you would have to look up the word in a dictionary manually or look up the meaning of something in an encyclopedia set. It took more time, and therefore, I guess the argument is more investment, more mental investment in whatever it was that you were trying to find out. But Carr is saying that this is a problem because now that we have Google, we don't have to do that anymore. And he says that deep reading has now become a struggle, which I think is interesting because in terms of what we've been talking about in this class, the idea of critical reading as opposed to surface level reading. He says, my mind now expects to take in information the way the net distributes it, in a swiftly moving stream of particles. Once I was a scuba diver in the sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski. So he's making this argument, and I think it's interesting the sort of supporting evidence that he uses to make it. He quotes a couple well-known people from the past, some philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche. He also quotes a couple specialists as well. He quotes Marianne Wolf, a developmental psychologist at Tufts University. So there's some sources with authority there. If you're trying to write an essay and you're trying to make a point, you would want to quote others who are knowledgeable in that topic and who also would tend to support your point. That's going back to the ethos appeal that we talked about a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I think, in the lectures. Because again, remember, for your rhetorical analysis, it is asking you to read the essay that you choose to analyze and determine, is it making a logos appeal, a pathos appeal, or an ethos appeal? And that's, again, an appeal either to logic or facts, logos, an appeal to emotions or telling stories, pathos, or an appeal to credibility, or authority, and that would be ethos, And so Nicholas Carr is making a bit of an ethos appeal there by quoting these names. But for the most part, he tends to talk about his own experiences a lot. He talks about the struggle of sitting down and trying to read a book such as War and Peace, which, if you haven't seen it, it's a giant, 900-page novel. And he says it's a struggle. And he talks about how when he thinks this has changed with him, how he feels that his mind's not as sharp as it used to be. And those aren't really good supporting evidences to back up what he's saying. Relying on personal experience is anecdotal. It's not really proving anything. It's just kind of an opinion at that point, saying, I feel this way, and because of that, here's my thesis statement. He's saying, I feel that my brain has slowed down since the advent of Google, and therefore Google is making us stupid. It doesn't logically follow, right? I think the argument can be made, or you could try to make the argument using more hard facts, more data, make it more of a logos-driven appeal. But Carr doesn't choose to do that. And maybe it's because he thinks that if he throws out a lot of statistics and data, it'll bore his readers. And he's also still trying to, again, tell a bit of a story here, too, to keep people interested. But I think it does weaken his argument a bit. One thing that he does do that I think is strong in terms of trying to make an argument is that he addresses the counter argument, too. Right near the end of the essay, he says, maybe I'm just a worrywart. There's a tendency to glorify technological progress, and there's also a counter tendency to expect the worst of every new tool or machine. So he's anticipating objections to his argument here. He's saying, I might just be one of these doomsayers who has nothing good to say about new technologies when they come out. That's the case. It might be true. But then he turns around to say that he thinks he's right, which of course he would, because otherwise he wouldn't be writing the essay. So there are some interesting things to learn in the Carr essay in terms of composition, whether or not you agree with his argument or not. Examining it for the different rhetorical appeals that he uses, the different strategies that he's making, such as presenting a strong counter argument. And presenting a counter argument's good because it shows that you have thought the issue through. And we've talked about that a little bit in past lectures as well. So this isn't the only what I would classify as a social science essay in this class. We're also going to stick with those next week as well. And again, these aren't, officially labeled social sciences essays or history essays. They're essays. That's how they strike me. They would probably be categorized in those genres. The third reading for this week, which was by C.S. Lewis, and it was about fairy stories. I'm going to have us go ahead and skip that for this week. I might post it a little bit later, but I wanted to have some discussion about fiction and what the role of fiction in poetry would be, because that's a genre as well. And we can certainly have that discussion, but I didn't think that the essay itself added anything more to it than we would have to say about it if we discussed it in our discussion boards or anything. So don't worry about that third essay. So yeah, those were the genres, history and social science, and those were some of the ways to go about analyzing those. Again, remember with the rhetorical analysis, we're not talking about what the author is saying or what point the author is making. We're examining how they're making it. What evidences do they use? What strategies do they use? What ties that whole essay together? So please get a hold of me if you're trying to go about your rhetorical analysis and you have any questions. I'm always here to help, and I'm looking forward to reading those. So those will be due again, not next Monday, but the Monday after that. Okay, I hope everybody's doing good, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.